Usually when we talk about reaching the absolute pinnacle of our careers, there's this expectation of like constant frenetic motion.
Oh yeah, like a pinball.
Exactly. You're just bouncing from meeting to meeting, answering emails at midnight. You have to be constantly visible and constantly connected.
Right, and you kind of wear that hustle like a badge of honor.
Yeah, because that sensation of busyness, it tricks you into feeling like you're actually moving forward.
But then you look at a landscape of truly world-changing intellectual achievement, and suddenly that pinball machine just gets unplugged.
Totally. And that's exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to another deep dive. Our mission today is to give you a definitive shortcut guide to becoming a master of focus in a really distracted world.
It gives you a massive professional and personal edge.
It really does. And to do this, we are looking at some incredible excerpts and case studies from Cal Newport's acclaimed audiobook, Deep Work: Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World.
And, to really set the stage here, we find ourselves looking at the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung in 1922.
Right. The story of Jung in 1922 is basically the perfect foundation for all of this.
It really is. At the time, Jung is this incredibly brilliant psychiatrist in Zurich, but he is under just unimaginable intellectual and psychological pressure.
Because he's literally in intellectual warfare with Sigmund Freud, his former mentor.
Exactly. Jung is trying to introduce these incredibly controversial, paradigm-shifting ideas to the field of psychology. And to back them up, he has to think harder, clearer, and deeper than his chaotic life in Zurich actually allows.
Yeah, I mean, he had a bustling clinical practice, a really vibrant coffeehouse culture, constant lectures.
It was essentially a 19th century version of our modern pinball machine.
So to escape the pinball machine, he does something completely drastic. He retreats to a village called Bullingen, right near Lake Zurich.
But he doesn't just run the nice little cabin for the weekend.
Yeah. No, he builds a primitive two-story stone tower in the woods. Like, we were talking no electricity. Light came from oil lamps, heat from a fireplace.
And he adds this private office where he keeps the key with him at all times. Nobody is allowed in without his explicit permission.
It's basically the ultimate architectural do not disturb sign. I love it so much.
It's amazing. But, the key here is he wasn't running away from his responsibilities. He was actually elevating them.
Right?
He was engaging in what the author calls deep work. That is the core concept we are dissecting today.
Let's define that for everyone listening.
So deep work refers to professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limits.
Okay, so it's not just checking off a to-do list.
No, not at all. These are the intense efforts that create new value, drastically improve your skills, and are incredibly hard for anyone else to replicate.
So by locking himself in that stone tower, Jung was forcing his brain to operate at its absolute maximum capacity.
Exactly. And that sustained, unbroken focus is what allowed him to produce the foundational texts of analytical psychology.
Yeah.
Jung was intuitively tapping into a superpower that we have today almost entirely lost.
Okay, let's unpack the reality of this. Because going to a stone tower by a lake sounds incredibly romantic, but we live in the modern economic reality.
Right, you can't just abandon your job.
Yeah, a listener might be sitting in a cubicle or a home office right now, staring at a literal mountain of Slack notifications. So why does adopting the mindset of a 1922 Swiss psychiatrist matter for them right now?
Because the global economy is undergoing a massive seismic shift. Economists Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee actually call it the Great Restructuring.
The Great Restructuring. Okay, what is driving that?
It's being driven by the explosive, exponential rise of digital technology and intelligent machines. Artificial intelligence, advanced algorithms, automation.
So our technologies are racing ahead.
Yes, but our organizational skills and our human adaptations are severely lagging behind. And in the midst of this great restructuring, the economy is permanently dividing.
It's no longer a rising tide lifting all boats.
Exactly. According to the data in the source material, there are 3 specific groups that are going to absolutely thrive and reap a massively disproportionate amount of the financial benefits of this new age.
Well, let's break down those 3 groups because I assume everyone listening wants to be in one of them.
Right. So the first group is the high-skilled workers. These are the individuals who can work creatively and effectively with complex, intelligent machines.
Give me an example of who that would be.
Think of someone like Nate Silver, the data analyst. He doesn't just read polls. He feeds thousands of disparate, messy data points into complex statistical analysis software.
Right, he uses that program Stata, right?
Yeah, Stata.
Yeah.
And it isn't something you just click around in easily. It requires a deep understanding of statistical methodology. Plus, he uses languages like SQL.
Structured query language.
Exactly. It's essentially the complex code used to communicate with massive databases to tease out incredibly valuable election or sports forecasts.
So for someone like Nate Silver, the intelligent machines aren't a threat. They are his primary tool.
Precisely. His value comes from his ability to speak their highly technical language.
Okay, that makes sense. And what's the second group?
The superstars. Because technology has fundamentally destroyed regionalism, companies are no longer constrained to hire the best person in their local zip code.
Oh, wow. Yeah, remote work really changed that.
Completely. If I need a programmer, I don't need a local average programmer. I can hire the absolute best programmer in the world remotely for exactly the amount of time I need them.
Like David Heinemeier Hansson.
Yes. The programming superstar who created the Ruby on Rails web development framework. He can live in Spain. His clients can be in Iowa or Tokyo, and he captures a massive, outsized portion of the global market.
Because top-tier talent isn't a commodity.
Exactly. When you are the absolute best, the digital economy funnels the rewards directly to you.
Okay, so that leaves the third group, which is the owners. These are the people with the immense capital to just invest in these new technologies, like the billionaire venture capitalist John Doerr.
Right. They just own the machines.
Now, assuming we don't all have billions of dollars lying around to become owners, you and I need to aim for those first two groups, the high-skilled workers and the superstars.
And the sources point out that to join those lucrative groups, you fundamentally need two core, non-negotiable abilities.
What's the first one?
The first is the ability to quickly master hard things. Technology changes so rapidly that whatever tool you are using today will likely be obsolete in 5 years.
So you have to constantly be learning complex systems over and over again.
Right. And the second ability is you have to produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed.
Because you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't actually output tangible, elite-level results, you won't thrive.
Exactly. And here is the connective tissue for all of this. Both of these abilities absolutely require deep work.
Okay, let's drill into the biology of that for a second. If deep work is like cognitive weightlifting, what is actually happening in our brains when we try to master a hard thing?
It's fascinating.
Because you hear people say, I'm just going to learn to code while I watch Netflix.
Yeah, and the biological reality of learning makes that basically impossible. The science of skill acquisition, specifically the study of deliberate practice, shows that learning requires tight, uninterrupted focus.
To trigger specific biological processes, right?
Yes. When you focus intensely on a specific skill, you are forcing specific circuits of neurons in your brain to fire repeatedly.
Okay.
And when they fire repeatedly in a state of high concentration, your body responds by wrapping those neural circuits in a fatty tissue called myelin.
Right, the myelin sheathing.
Exactly. It acts like insulation on an electrical wire, allows the brain signals to travel faster, cleaner, and more effortlessly. You literally upgrade the hardware of your brain.
Oh, wow. So you physically change your brain structure.
You do, but, and this is critical, you cannot trigger the production of myelin if you are constantly breaking your focus to check your Facebook feed. The circuits have to fire in isolation.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about needing this intense focus, but I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of every stressed out employee listening right now.
Fair enough, go ahead.
If I go tell my boss right now that I'm shutting off my email and going into a stone tower because answering emails is shallow work, I am going to get fired.
People definitely fear that.
A McKinsey study cited in the material says knowledge workers spend over 60% of their work week engaged in electronic communication and internet searching.
It's a huge chunk of time.
And every study shows we are working grueling 60-hour weeks. So how can you call this a trap when it's literally what our employers demand of us? We are sweating, we are exhausted, we are working hard.
You are exhausted, but you aren't doing the heavy lifting. That is the tragic irony of the modern knowledge work.
Okay, unpack that.
What you are doing, what takes up that 60% of your week, is called shallow work. These are non-cognitively demanding logistical style tasks.
And they are almost always performed while in a state of distraction.
Exactly. Moving an email from one folder to another, replying, "sounds good," to a Slack thread, attending a status update meeting where you were secretly scrolling on your phone under the table.
Guilty as charged.
Right. But because these tasks are shallow, They do not create much new value in the world. And most terrifyingly, from an economic perspective, they are incredibly easy to replicate.
Which means they can be automated.
Yes. If your job is essentially acting as a human network, router taking information from person A and forwarding it to person B, a relatively simple algorithm or a significantly cheaper worker halfway across the world will eventually replace you.
So the exertion you feel isn't the exertion of building muscle?
No, it's the exhaustion of running 1,000 tiny cognitive errands that ultimately lead nowhere.
That perfectly frames the incredible story of Jason Ben from the book.
Oh, his story is the perfect example of this.
He was a financial consultant, fresh out of an elite college, working at a firm in Virginia, and he essentially had an existential crisis about this exact dynamic.
Yeah, he realized that the vast majority of his job consisted of manually manipulating data in Excel spreadsheets.
Right, he was spending 6 hours a day copying, pasting, and formatting. It felt like work. It was exhausting. But then he actually taught himself how to write a simple Excel macro.
And for those unfamiliar, a macro is just a small script, a tiny piece of code that automates repetitive tasks in a software program.
So he writes this macro, and suddenly, a grueling 6-hour daily process takes him a single button click and less than an hour of actual oversight.
Which is amazing.
Now, most people would just quietly click the button, play solitaire for 5 hours, and collect their paycheck. But for Ben, this was a terrifying epiphany.
Because he realized how unbelievably little value he was actually providing to the world.
Exactly. If a rudimentary script could replace 80% of his output, his shallow skills were economically worthless in the long run. He knew he needed to learn a truly hard, high-value skill quickly.
He decided he was going to become a computer programmer.
But the obstacle was that he had zero background in computer science. And worse, his brain was entirely wired for the shallow end.
He admitted that on some days he spent up to 98% of his time surfing the web. His attention span was completely shattered.
So he realized that before he could even attempt to learn the syntax of coding, he had to physically and mentally rehabilitate his ability to focus.
And the way he did it is wild.
He literally locked himself in a room. No computer, no smartphone, no internet connection. He went in with nothing but physical textbooks, index cards, and a highlighter.
That sounds like torture for a modern worker.
He forced himself to sit there and study for 5 disconnected hours a day. He described it as agonizing. His brain was screaming for the novelty of a notification, the easy dopamine hit of a web page.
The boredom was physically painful. He was going through literal withdrawal symptoms from distraction.
But he endured the pain because he was engaging in cognitive weightlifting. He was forcing those neurons to fire, building that myelin sheathing.
And that painful, deliberate practice paid off remarkably.
It really did. After 2 months of that intense, deep study, his brain was rewired. He attended a notoriously difficult, highly selective coding bootcamp.
He absorbed the incredibly complex material, graduated at the top of his class, and immediately landed a job at a San Francisco tech startup.
His starting salary was $100,000 a year, more than double what he was making as a human spreadsheet formatter.
He leveraged the raw power of deep work to move from a highly replaceable, anxious, shallow worker to a highly valued, secure, high-skilled worker.
So if you are listening to this right now, I want you to mentally audit your own week. Look back at the last 5 days of your calendar.
Are you building mental muscle?
Exactly. Are you carving out time to lock yourself in your own version of that room with the highlighters to master a hard thing? Or are you just running cognitive errands, clicking buttons, and forwarding emails that an algorithm will be doing in a few years?
This brings us to a massive, glaring paradox. We have just laid out the empirical reality that deep work is economically incredibly valuable. It is the defining superpower of the 21st century economy.
Right.
But then you walk into almost any modern corporate workplace, and the environment is quite literally designed to destroy that exact superpower.
It feels like companies are spending millions of dollars to build giant dodgeball courts for our attention.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. You look at the rise of these massive open-plan offices.
Like Facebook, right?
Yeah, Facebook built a single 10-acre room with thousands of employees sitting shoulder to shoulder on movable furniture.
The justification is always serendipitous collaboration.
But the reality is a cacophony of visual and auditory interruptions. Then you layer on instant messaging systems like Slack or Microsoft Teams,
which are explicitly designed to interrupt you.
Exactly. They use flashing lights, bouncing icons, and red notification dots to hijack your attention the very second a colleague has a random thought.
And it extends beyond the office, too. Esteemed media companies now force their serious investigative journalists to maintain a frothy, constant, all-day presence on Twitter.
All of these macro trends in the business world actively, aggressively destroy a human being's biological capacity to go deep.
Okay, but businesses are ruthless about the bottom line. If deep work is what actually generates revenue and distraction destroys deep work, why are executives willingly spending capital to ruin the productivity of their own workforce? It makes no logical sense.
It seems illogical until you understand the 3 hidden structural flaws embedded in modern business culture.
Okay, what's the first flaw?
The first flaw is what the author calls the metric black hole. In the industrial age, measuring value was easy. If you bought a new machine, you could calculate exactly how many more widgets it produced per hour.
And you'd know immediately if it was a good investment.
Right. But in knowledge work, it is incredibly difficult to measure the bottom line impact of an individual's distraction, or conversely, the bottom line financial value of an hour of their deep work.
There is a staggering example of this in the source material involving Tom Cochran, who was the chief technology officer at Atlantic Media.
Oh, this story is incredible.
Cochran realized one day that he was spending an hour and a half every single morning just processing his email inbox. Because he's a data-driven CTO, he decided to quantify this pain.
He ran a company-wide analysis.
He gathered data on the average typing speed of his employees, their average reading speed, their average salaries, and the sheer volume of emails being sent internally every day.
And the math was terrifying.
He discovered that Atlantic Media was spending well over $1 million a year just paying human beings to move information around via internal emails.
As Cochran pointed out, it was as if the company was cutting a check for a small luxury Learjet every single year, just in the soft labor costs required to maintain a free communication tool.
But here is the crux of the metric black hole. Because that $1 million cost is dispersed across hundreds of salaries, it never appears as a single line item on an executive's budget.
It is completely invisible. And since the massive financial bleed of distraction is hidden, businesses naturally fall prey to the second structural flaw, the principle of least resistance.
Let's define the mechanics of that. What makes resistance so low?
Without clear metrics telling a manager that a specific behavior is destroying value, human beings will naturally gravitate toward whatever behavior is easiest in the immediate moment.
That makes sense. We're wired to take the easy path.
Think about how a workplace functions. It is significantly easier for me to just shoot off a quick Slack message interrupting you to ask a question, rather than taking the time to search the company archives or figure out the answer myself.
Oh, absolutely.
It is easier to demand that everyone be reachable by email 24/7, because it saves managers from the short-term discomfort of having to meticulously plan workflows and anticipate bottlenecks.
So a culture of constant connectivity is fundamentally a crutch.
Yes. It saves us from the heavy cognitive lifting of planning, concentration, and independent problem solving.
And if you don't have to plan, you can just react all day. Which leads directly into the third flaw, which I think is the most insidious: busyness as a proxy for productivity.
Let's look at how productivity used to be measured. Think about an academic researcher. A professor's value is abundantly clear. They publish important peer-reviewed papers.
The academic world even has a specific metric called an H-index, right?
Exactly. It mathematically calculates both the sheer number of papers a scientist has published and the number of times those papers have been cited by others. It is an objective score of their intellectual impact.
Or consider an assembly line worker. Their productivity is literally the number of flawless widgets they assemble per hour.
But for a middle manager, a marketing coordinator, or a corporate strategist in a modern office, the definition of productivity is totally vague. What tangible thing are they actually producing on a random Tuesday at 2 p.m.?
They usually have no idea. They don't have a rack of finished widgets to point to at 5 p.m.
So, because they lack an H-index or a widget count to prove their worth, they revert back to the crude metrics of the industrial age. They try to physically look busy.
The subconscious logic becomes, if I am sending emails at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, if I am visibly sitting in back-to-back meetings all day, if I reply to your instant message within 3 seconds, I must be a highly valuable, productive employee.
The sheer volume of frantic motion becomes the proxy for actual value, even if the motion produces nothing of substance.
And we have to recognize the cultural ideology that normalizes all of this. The social critic Evgeny Morozov calls it the cult of the internet, or a technopoly.
Yeah, this is the deeply ingrained societal assumption that if a behavior or a digital tool is internet-centric, it is inherently good, innovative, and entirely necessary.
We idolize anything high-tech as an unquestionable sign of progress.
If you are a professional today and you say you aren't on Twitter, or you refuse to download the company's new chat app, people look at you as if you are a dinosaur.
The technopoly makes any alternative to high-tech, frictionless distractions seem completely invisible and culturally irrelevant.
Which perfectly explains why a serious, award-winning journalist reporting on global conflicts feels immense pressure from her editors to tweet out photos of her lunch.
It is not because anyone has empirical data proving that lunch photos drive newspaper subscriptions. It's simply because the technopoly demands homage to the platform.
But the listener needs to recognize the incredible silver lining here.
There's a silver lining.
Yes, because your peers, your competitors, and your employers are completely caught in this metric black hole because they are blinded by the principle of least resistance and worshiping at the altar of the technopoly. They are voluntarily abandoning their capacity for deep work.
They are giving up the superpower.
Which makes your ability to cultivate and sustain deep work increasingly rare, and therefore exponentially more valuable in the marketplace.
So we've established the unassailable economic value. We've established the structural reasons why it's so rare. But what is the ultimate goal here?
That's the big question.
Are we just trying to become ultra-efficient, unfeeling productivity robots? Is the end game just to crank out more lines of code or more marketing memos so we can get promoted and buy a nicer car? Because if that's it, it feels a little bleak.
It's a vital question, and the answer requires us to shift our focus inward. Depth isn't just a tool for economic output. It is fundamentally the bedrock of living a meaningful, satisfying human life.
The sources make a compelling case that a deep life is inherently a good life.
And we can validate this by looking through three completely different lenses: neurology, psychology, and philosophy.
Let's start with the neurological argument because the story here is incredibly powerful. The science writer Winifred Gallagher received a terrifying advanced cancer diagnosis.
It's the kind of news that shatters your world.
But walking out of the hospital, she made this profound, deliberate neurological decision. She was not going to let the disease monopolize her attention.
She consciously forced her attention onto the positive, immediate details of her life.
Right, enjoying a good movie, taking a walk, having a 6:30 p.m. martini. And she found, to her own surprise, that her life during aggressive cancer treatment was actually quite pleasant.
Her experience perfectly illustrates a grand unified theory of the brain. Our minds construct our reality based entirely on what we pay attention to.
It sounds simple, but the biological implications are profound.
If you spend your day focused intensely on a deep, complex, and important endeavor, your neurological pathways interpret your world as being rich in meaning and gravity.
But if you spend your day with your attention fractured across a dozen shallow, often stressful or trivial stimuli like angry emails, political arguments on social media, or office gossip, your brain literally constructs a worldview dominated by stress, irritation, and triviality.
And there is a darker side to this. An idle, continually distracted mind naturally defaults to what evolutionary biologists might call a threat detection state.
Without a deep task to anchor it, your brain starts looping over what is wrong with your life, your relationships, your status.
Distraction breeds anxiety. Depth protects us from that existential dread.
Now, what about the actual mechanics of shifting our attention back and forth? There is a concept from a business professor named Sophie Leroy called attention residue that really changed how I view multitasking.
It's a fantastic concept. Think of your brain like a computer's web browser. When you are doing deep work, you have one tab open.
But what happens when you switch tasks to check a quick email?
Leroy's research shows that it's like opening a second heavy browser tab. When you switch your focus from writing a complex report to reading a Slack message, and then try to switch back to the report, your brain does not instantly close the Slack tab.
A portion of your cognitive capacity remains stuck thinking about the message.
That is the attention residue. It silently drains your cognitive RAM in the background. Even if you only look away for 10 seconds, the residue degrades your performance.
It lowers your IQ temporarily and dramatically increases your stress levels because your brain is trying to run two incompatible programs at once.
Which leads us directly into the psychological argument for depth. And we have to talk about Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
He's the legendary psychologist who coined the concept of flow.
Exactly. In the 1980s, he ran this massive study using the experience sampling method. He gave subjects pagers, and he would page them at random times throughout the day.
When the pager beeped, the subjects had to record exactly what they were doing and how happy or fulfilled they felt in that exact moment.
And the data revealed a massive flaw in how human beings conceptualize happiness. If you ask people what makes them happy, they will almost always describe a state of relaxation.
Sitting on a beach doing absolutely nothing.
But the pager data empirically proved the exact opposite. People were actually significantly happier, more fulfilled, and reported higher levels of well-being when they were at work.
Wait, really? At work?
Provided their minds and bodies were stretched to their absolute limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult. That state of total immersion, where time seems to vanish and your ego drops away, is what he called flow.
We don't crave the beach. Our minds biologically crave the challenge.
Precisely. Deep work is essentially a reliable machine for generating flow states. When you eliminate the attention residue and commit to depth, you are giving your brain the complex challenge it needs to generate profound psychological satisfaction.
And if we pan out even further, we hit the philosophical argument. The philosophers Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly wrote beautifully about how, post-Enlightenment, modern society lost the sense of inherent sacredness and meaning in the world.
We stopped believing that the universe had a divine order we were participating in.
But they argue we can reclaim that sense of the sacred through craftsmanship, which brings up one of my favorite stories in the source material about Rick Furr.
The blacksmith.
Yes. He's a blacksmith working out of a barn in Wisconsin called Door County Forge Works. He specializes in recreating Viking-era swords.
And he doesn't just stamp them out on a machine. He uses a 1,500-year-old technique to smelt crucible steel.
Exactly. He will spend 8 agonizing hours just hammering a tiny ingot of metal. But he's not just mindlessly whacking it with a hammer. He is in a state of absolute, unbreakable communion with the material.
He is peering at the microscopic changes in the steel, tapping it gently, listening to the pitch of the metal ring, reading the heat colors.
And when he finally quenches the forged blade in oil and the residual heat engulfs the sword in a literal pillar of fire, the look of satisfaction on his face is transcendent.
He told the author, "To do it right, it is the most complicated thing I know how to make. I don't need a sword, but I have to make them."
He is physically extracting meaning from the metal itself through his total devotion to the craft.
This is the crucial leap that the listener must make. You do not have to be toiling in an open-air barn covered in soot to be a craftsman.
Right.
A knowledge worker writing an elegant, highly optimized algorithm, or a lawyer carefully crafting a brilliant, airtight legal brief, they are engaging in the exact same fundamental human process.
The meaning does not reside in the physical object. The meaning is generated by the skill, the intense focus, and the appreciation inherent in the craftsmanship itself.
If you approach your seemingly mundane office work with the rigorous depth and profound respect of a master wheelwright or a Viking blacksmith, you transform a standard job into a portal to a deeply satisfying life.
Okay, here's where the rubber meets the road. The theory is beautiful. I love the idea of locking myself in a stone tower like Jung, or forging a Viking sword of computer code.
But in reality, as we established, if you totally vanished from your office to be a blacksmith of marketing memos, you'd get fired.
Exactly. Is this deep work philosophy just for eccentric billionaires, famous authors, and tenured geniuses who don't have bosses? How does a normal person actually do this?
You are identifying the exact hurdle where most people fail. You cannot just rely on good intentions. You cannot just wake up and say, I'm going to focus really hard today.
Why not?
Decades of psychological research, most notably by Roy Baumeister, have empirically proven that willpower is a finite, highly depletable biological resource.
Ah, right.
If you leave your email inbox open on your second monitor and you just tell yourself, I'm going to ignore it, your brain has to engage in active suppression. It is burning cognitive energy just to resist the temptation of looking.
Eventually, your willpower battery will drain to zero, and you will succumb to the distraction.
To succeed, you need strict routines and rituals that minimize the friction of transitioning into a deep state. And the author outlines 4 distinct philosophies of deep work scheduling. You have to analyze your career and your life and choose the one that fits.
Let's go through them in detail so the listener can figure out their own strategy. What's the first philosophy?
The first is the monastic philosophy. This is the most extreme approach. The goal here is to maximize deep efforts by completely eliminating or radically minimizing all shallow obligations.
Give me an example.
Think of Donald Knuth, the legendary computer scientist. He literally stopped using email entirely in 1990. He provides a physical postal address on his website. and his assistant curates his mail, which he might look at once every 3 months. Neil Stephenson, the acclaimed sci-fi author, operates the same way.
He states publicly that all his time and attention are spoken for, and he does not grant interviews or respond to messages.
For these people, their immense value to society comes from doing one highly specific, incredibly difficult thing, like inventing new algorithms or writing epic novels exceptionally well. They burn the boats of communication to protect the work.
Yeah, that is definitely not going to work for 99% of us. If I tell my boss I'm only accepting physical mail, I'm out on the street. What is the second option?
The bimodal philosophy. This asks you to divide your time, dedicating clearly defined stretches to monastic isolated depth, and leaving the rest of your time wide open to everything else.
Carl Jung is the perfect historical example of that.
Yes, he was completely monastic when he retreated to his Bollingen Tower, but when he returned to Zurich, he was totally accessible, running his clinic and drinking coffee with colleagues.
A modern example is Adam Grant, the incredibly prolific Wharton professor. He stacks all of his teaching and student meetings into one semester, leaving the entire other semester completely free for deep, uninterrupted research.
And he does this on a micro scale too. During his busy weeks, he will put an out-of-office auto-reply on his email and physically vanish for 2 to 4 days just to write.
The key is that the deep periods must be substantial, right? At least a full day.
Yeah,
You can't be bimodal in 2-hour chunks.
that's right.
That is still pretty extreme, but slightly more flexible. I think the third one is where most standard knowledge workers will find their footing. The rhythmic philosophy.
This is a very popular one.
I relate to this one strongly. It's about turning deep work into a simple, relentless, regular habit. It is based on the chain method made famous by the comedian Jerry Seinfeld.
Seinfeld wanted to write better jokes, so he bought a giant wall calendar. Every day he wrote, he put a big red X over that date.
The goal wasn't to write a masterpiece every day. The goal was simply to not break the visual chain of red X's.
The genius of the rhythmic approach is that it completely removes the need to make a decision about when you are going to work. Decision fatigue is a massive drain on willpower.
Brian Chappell, a doctoral candidate who was also working a full-time job and raising a newborn, used this perfectly.
Right, he couldn't vanish to a stone tower, and he couldn't find random 90-minute chunks during his chaotic workday.
So he made a hard, non-negotiable rule. He woke up and worked deeply on his dissertation from 5:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. every single weekday. No exceptions.
By doing a little bit every single day with rock-solid consistency, he generated an astronomical amount of output without the guilt of feeling like he was ignoring his family or his day job.
And the final one is the journalistic philosophy. This is named after journalists who are professionally trained to shift into a deep writing mode on a moment's notice to hit a deadline.
The classic example in the book is Walter Isaacson. Back in the 1980s, he was a very busy editor at Time magazine, but he was also writing this massive 900-page epic book called The Wise Men on the Side.
His friends recall going on a beach vacation with him. He would be hanging out on the patio, having a drink, totally relaxed.
Then he would just casually excuse himself, go up to his room for exactly 20 minutes, pound furiously on his typewriter in a state of deep concentration, and come right back down to rejoin the conversation, totally unfazed.
He fit deep work into the exact, unpredictable cracks of his busy schedule.
But the sources provide a massive, flashing warning label on the journalistic approach. It is not for novices.
Why is that?
Switching rapidly between a shallow, relaxed state and intense depth requires an immense, highly trained amount of cognitive control. If you have not spent years practicing concentration, that rapid context switching will drain your willpower instantly. The attention residue will overwhelm you, and you'll just end up staring at a blank page for 20 minutes.
So listener, you have to be honest with yourself about which one you are. Are you the isolated monk, the dual life bimodal worker, the daily rhythmic early riser, or the highly trained on-the-fly journalist?
Because once you pick a philosophy, you can't just wing it. You have to support it with meticulous rituals.
Exactly. Great minds do not sit around waiting for the muse to strike. They work like accountants. Charles Darwin had a hyper-strict, unchanging daily routine of walking the exact same path, eating at the exact same time, and retiring to his study at exact intervals.
Robert Caro, the legendary biographer, has incredibly specific rules for his office. He demands exactly where his reference books are placed, how his notebooks are stacked, and what he wears.
A functional deep work ritual needs to explicitly dictate where you will work and for exactly how long.
It needs strict rules for how you will work. For example, a total ban on internet use, or a mandate that you must produce 500 words before stopping.
And it needs to dictate how you will support the biological needs of the work, ensuring you have a specific type of coffee ready or scheduling a 5-minute walking break to keep the blood flowing.
You systemize the environment so you don't waste a single ounce of mental energy deciding what to do.
I really want to zero in on this fascinating concept of grand gestures that supports these rituals, because the sources talk about J.K. Rowling struggling to finish the final Harry Potter book.
Right, she was at her home, but the dogs were barking, the kids were loud, the window cleaner was banging on the glass. She couldn't focus.
So she does something wild. She checks into a suite at the Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, which is this magnificent castle-like 5-star hotel. She pays over $1,000 a day just for a quiet room to write in.
And Bill Gates taking his famous isolated think weeks in a secluded cabin where he reads stacks of papers.
Or the entrepreneur, Peter Shankman, who had a book contract due. He bought a $4,000 round-trip business class ticket to Tokyo, flew all the way there, drank a single espresso in the airport lounge, and immediately flew all the way back.
Because the forced isolation of the airplane allowed him to write the entire book manuscript in 30 hours.
Now, is that just a flex of immense wealth, or is there an actual psychological lever being pulled there?
It is entirely a psychological lever, and it leverages the brain's inherent biases, specifically loss aversion and the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay, unpack that.
By committing a massive, almost unreasonable amount of effort, time, or money to a change in environment for one specific task, you radically increase the perceived importance of that task in your subconscious.
It short-circuits the brain's natural instinct to procrastinate.
Exactly. If you're sitting on your couch, it's easy to turn on the TV. If you just paid $1,000 for a hotel room or flew to Tokyo, your brain says, this must be a matter of life and death importance. I cannot afford to fail.
The grand gesture forces the focus. But I also want to pivot slightly here, because all of these examples, Rowling, Gates, Shankman, sound incredibly solitary. And there is a misconception that deep work only happens in total agonizing isolation.
Right, what about collaboration? Some of the greatest breakthroughs happen in teams.
Exactly. Look at the architecture of MIT's famous Building 20, or Bell Labs, in the mid-20th century. Bell Labs produced the transistor, the solar cell, the laser world-changing innovations.
They didn't achieve this by cramming scientists into an open-plan office, but they didn't lock them in stone towers forever either. They utilized a hub-and-spoke architecture.
The physical building had incredibly long, shared hallways where scientists from completely different disciplines were practically forced to bump into each other. That is the hub. It generates the serendipitous encounters and the cross-pollination of ideas.
But, crucially, branching off those hallways were soundproofed, highly private offices, the spokes. After a scientist had a brilliant conversation in the hallway, they could retreat to their private spoke to actually do the brutal, deep cognitive lifting required to turn that idea into a mathematical reality.
And sometimes the deep work happens together, the whiteboard effect. Like the physicists John Bardeen and Walter Brattain inventing the solid-state transistor at Bell Labs.
They weren't alone. They were working side by side at a whiteboard, pushing each other deeper and deeper into the physics of the problem, catching each other's errors faster than they ever could alone.
Collaborative deep work can be incredibly potent if both parties are operating at the limit of their cognitive abilities.
Which brings us to the operational reality. How do you actually execute this day in and day out amid the chaos of a normal job?
Cal Newport adapted a highly successful business framework called the 4 Disciplines of Execution, or 4DX, for personal deep work. This is the tactical blueprint.
Let's break down those 4 disciplines. What is step 1?
Discipline 1. Focus on the wildly important. You cannot just have a vague, generalized desire to focus more or be less distracted.
You have to give your deep work a highly specific, fiercely ambitious goal that will yield a massive professional return.
For example, I will write a peer-reviewed paper on market trends by November, or I will master the Python programming language to the level of building a functional app. The goal must be so important that it crowds out the superficial demands.
Okay, discipline 2 is where I think people get confused. Act on lid measures, not lag measures. Let's really explain the mechanism here. What is the psychological difference?
This is the most crucial distinction in the 4DX framework. A lag measure is the ultimate result you are trying to achieve. For a writer, the lag measure is a published book. For a salesperson, it's total revenue generated.
The problem with lag measures is that they arrive too late to change your behavior. By the time you see the final sales number or the published book, The performance that drove that result is already in the past. You can't alter it.
A lead measure, on the other hand, measures the specific, controllable behaviors that will drive the success of the lag measure.
For deep work, the ultimate universal lead measure is terrifyingly simple. Tallying the exact number of hours spent in a state of unbroken deep work dedicated to your wildly important goal. You have total control over your lead measure today.
Which flows perfectly into discipline 3, keep a compelling scorecard. I love this because it brings it into physical reality.
You need a physical artifact, placed prominently in your workspace, not hidden in a digital folder, tracking those deep work hours.
A simple piece of paper with tally marks works beautifully. When you physically mark an X on the paper after a grueling hour of focus, it triggers a hit of dopamine. You see the tally grow, and your brain biologically wants to keep the streak alive.
And finally, discipline 4. Create a cadence of accountability. You must institute a weekly review.
Every Friday afternoon, you sit down and confront your physical scorecard. You ask yourself hard questions. Did I hit my targeted hours? If not, what specific distraction derailed me? Was it a surprise meeting? Did I cave to email?
You diagnose the failure, and then you rigorously schedule your deep work blocks for the upcoming week based on what you learned. It transforms deep work from a wish into an accountable operational system.
But the sources issue a very stern warning here. You can have the best bimodal philosophy, you can buy a $1,000 hotel room, and you can have a flawless 40x scorecard taped to your monitor.
But if your brain is biologically addicted to distraction, your deep work sessions will utterly fail. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable part of this entire process. Rule 2, embrace boredom.
This is where we confront the physical damage done by constant connectivity. The late Stanford professor Clifford Nass conducted groundbreaking research on chronic multitaskers.
He found that people who constantly juggle emails, browser tabs, and phones are, in his clinical assessment, chronically distracted.
Yeah.
They're pretty much mental wrecks.
The mechanism is terrifying. Constant multitasking physically degrades the brain's ability to filter out irrelevancy. Your brain forgets how to ignore shiny objects. And the conventional wisdom to fix this is totally wrong.
Right. I see people all the time declaring they are doing a digital detox. They take a weekend off from the internet, go camping, and declare themselves cured.
But the sources say that is completely ineffective. It's the equivalent of eating perfectly healthy on a Sunday and then gorging on fast food Monday through Saturday. It does not rewire the baseline addiction.
So if a detox doesn't work, how do we actually fix the neural wiring?
The answer is completely counterintuitive, and it is the hardest pill for most people to swallow. Do not take breaks from distraction. You need to take breaks from focus.
Wait, explain the mechanism of that. How is that different?
Instead of trying to occasionally escape the internet, you must schedule strict, predefined blocks of time for internet use. And then, and this is the crucial part, you absolutely forbid yourself from using the internet outside of those blocks, no matter what.
Keep a notepad by your computer and write down the exact time you are allowed to go online next. Say it's 30 minutes away. You are working on a hard problem, you get stuck, your brain experiences a surge of cognitive friction, and it literally screams for the novelty of a quick social media check to relieve the tension.
In that exact moment, you have to endure the boredom. You have to sit there feeling the agonizing desire to click away, and you must resist it until the time block arrives.
It's precisely in that microscopic moment of resisting the urge to switch tasks that you are doing the cognitive calisthenics needed to rebuild your focus muscles. You are training the brain to tolerate the absence of novelty.
That makes total sense. And to accelerate that training, you can use Roosevelt dashes. I absolutely love this historical anecdote.
Oh, this is a great one.
When Teddy Roosevelt was at Harvard, he had an insane, hyperactive array of interests. He was boxing, wrestling, publishing books on ornithology, socializing. He spent barely a quarter of a normal student's day actually studying, yet he consistently got honor grades.
How do you bend time like that?
He worked with blistering, teeth-gritting intensity. The method is to give yourself a hard, artificially constrained deadline for a deep task. If a reading assignment normally takes 2 hours, give yourself 45 minutes.
Make the deadline so tight, so unreasonable, that the only possible way to finish is to work with maximum adrenaline-fueled intensity, leaving zero cognitive room for a single distracting thought.
It acts like high-intensity interval training for your brain's concentration networks.
And you don't even have to be at your desk to train this. You can practice productive meditation during your physical downtime.
When you are walking the dog, commuting on a train, or taking a shower, times when your body is occupied but your mind is free, forcefully focus your attention on a single, well-defined professional problem. It could be outlining an article or solving a math proof.
As you do this, your mind will inevitably wander. You will start looping over an argument you had yesterday or reviewing facts you already know. The training occurs when you notice the wandering and forcefully, repeatedly pull your attention back to the next specific, logical step of the problem.
You can even use literal memory games as a training tool. The book highlights Daniel Keeloff, who struggled severely with ADHD and poor grades in school. He felt his brain was broken.
But then he trained himself to compete in memory championships by memorizing shuffled decks of playing cards. He used the ancient memory palace technique.
Let's explain how that works for the listener.
Basically, you visualize walking through a place you know well, like your childhood home. And as you walk through, you place vivid, bizarre, highly memorable images of the cards in different rooms. So the King of Hearts might be Elvis eating a hamburger in your bathtub.
The mechanism is that humans are terrible at remembering abstract data, but we have incredible spatial and visual memory. But here is the profound part. By obsessively training his memory, Keeloff inadvertently skyrocketed his baseline attentional control.
His ability to focus became so strong that he ended up graduating college with honors and entering a highly competitive PhD program. Memorizing cards wasn't a party trick. It was literally lifting heavy weights for his brain's focus mechanism.
But just as a physical muscle requires rest to grow stronger after lifting weights, your brain requires absolute idleness to consolidate learning and restore its focus reserves.
The essayist Tim Kreider profoundly stated that idleness is not a vice, nor is it a luxury. It is as indispensable to the brain as vitamin D is to the body. You must inject regular, substantial freedom from professional concerns into your day.
And there is hard science backing this up. It's not just about feeling relaxed, it's about how the brain actually solves problems, which brings in unconscious thought theory, right?
Yes. The Dutch psychologist Ap Dijksterhuis conducted fascinating research showing that for straightforward decisions, like buying a simple household item, your conscious, focused mind is best.
But for highly complex decisions with multiple, vague, and competing constraints, like hiring a new executive or restructuring a department, your unconscious mind is actually vastly superior at untangling the variables.
But your unconscious mind can only do that heavy background processing if your conscious mind stops actively obsessing over the problem. You have to let it go so the background algorithms can run.
Furthermore, there is attention restoration theory developed by psychologists Rachel and Stephen Kaplan. They prove that directed attention, the kind you use to read a spreadsheet or write code, is a finite biological resource that physically drains away.
But how do you refill it? You have to expose your brain to what they call inherently fascinating stimuli, walking in a forest, watching a sunset, or just having a relaxed conversation with friends.
These activities engage your brain gently without requiring forceful directed focus, allowing the directed attention reserves to slowly refill. Doom scrolling on Twitter does not refill this reserve, it actively drains it further.
But to actually get that restorative rest, you have to truly disconnect. Your brain won't rest if it feels like there is danger lingering in the background, which is why you must institute a strict shutdown ritual at the absolute end of your workday.
Walk me through what a shutdown ritual actually looks like.
At a set time, say 5:30 p.m., you initiate a specific routine. You check your emails one final time to ensure nothing is on fire. You update your master task lists. You look at your calendar and make a rough, sketched out plan for what you will tackle tomorrow.
And then you literally, out loud, say a specific phrase to signal the end. Cal Newport says, "Shutdown complete." And once you say it, you are unequivocally done. No checking email on the couch, no quick glances at Slack while cooking dinner.
And the biological reason that ritual is so vital is the Zeigarnik effect. This blew my mind.
The psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik discovered back in the 1920s that incomplete or interrupted tasks utterly dominate our attention. Think about our hunter-gatherer brains.
If we leave a task unfinished, like securing the perimeter of a camp, our brain views that open loop as a literal threat to our survival. So the subconscious keeps pinging the conscious mind with anxiety so you don't forget it.
If you do not explicitly capture your lingering work tasks on paper and create a trusted plan for them, the Zeigarnik effect will ensure those incomplete tasks haunt your evening, keeping your stress hormones elevated and preventing you from ever truly resting. The shutdown ritual closes the loop.
Okay, so let's assess where we are. The brain has been trained to endure boredom. The daily schedule and the bimodal or rhythmic philosophies are set. The necessity of idleness is respected. Now, the listener has to engage in the heavy pruning.
We arrive at rules 3 and 4. Quit social media and drain the shallows.
And social media is the third rail. People get incredibly defensive about this.
The author Bear-Ten Thurston actually did a highly publicized experiment where he unplugged completely for 25 days. No Facebook, no Twitter, no email, no digital presence whatsoever.
And he wrote about how incredibly peaceful and deeply human it felt. But because of his job in media, he eventually had to return to the digital world. And almost immediately, he slid right back into the fragmented, distracted blur.
This highlights a false binary that society forces on us. We assume we either have to be total digital hermits living in the woods, or we must be hyper-connected, exhausted slaves to the algorithmic feed.
That false binary traps millions of people.
But I want to channel the very real anxiety of the listener right now. The fear of missing out, or FOMO, is intense. If you tell me to quit Twitter or LinkedIn, my immediate reaction is panic.
What if I miss out on a massive career opportunity? What if Twitter helps me find an incredibly niche article that sparks my next big project?
Or on a personal level, what if Facebook is the only way I see my high school friend's new baby? There is undeniable, tangible benefit there, right? I can't just quit and nuke my network.
Your anxiety is entirely valid, and it is exactly what the tech platforms spend billions of dollars engineering you to feel. What you're expressing is the any benefit mindset.
It is the pervasive justification that if a digital tool offers any conceivable benefit whatsoever, or if you might miss out on anything by not using it, you are justified in letting it violently fragment your attention all day long.
But for a knowledge worker whose entire economic value relies on deep concentration, the any benefit mindset is catastrophic. You must abandon it and adopt what we call the craftsman approach to tool selection.
To understand the craftsman approach, we have to look at Forrest Pritchard. He is a sustainable farmer operating in the Blue Ridge Mountains. His job is raising animals.
To feed his animals in the winter, he needs hay. So, operating under the any benefit mindset, he should absolutely own a hay baler. It's a machine that performs a useful function.
But Pritchard actually sold his hay baler. Why would he do that? Because a craftsman looks beyond the obvious immediate benefit and assesses the long-term systemic impact on their ultimate goal.
Pritchard's ultimate goal was the long-term health of his soil and the financial viability of his farm.
Let's look at the mechanism of his decision. He realized that buying hay from a neighbor meant he was bringing outside nutrients onto his farm, enriching his soil for free.
Furthermore, operating and maintaining a heavy hay baler all summer compacted his fields, damaging the dirt. And the time he spent fixing the tractor was time he couldn't spend raising highly profitable chickens.
The tool had a benefit, yes, but the hidden costs to his overarching goal were massive. He evaluated the tool with deep, nuanced craftsmanship. Knowledge workers must evaluate network tools like Twitter, TikTok, or Slack, exactly like that farmer evaluates a tractor.
You do this by applying the law of the vital few, which most people know as the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule.
You sit down and ruthlessly identify your highest level personal and professional goals. Then you identify the 2 or 3 most important activities that actually move the needle on those goals.
The mathematical reality is that 80% of your success will come from just 20% of your activities. Once you identify those vital few activities, you ruthlessly evaluate your digital tools against them.
Consider incredibly successful authors like Malcolm Gladwell or Michael Lewis. They ignore Twitter completely. Is it because Twitter has absolutely zero value? No.
But it does not meaningfully support the core activity that drives 80% of their immense success, which is deep, patient, rigorous research and careful long-form writing. In fact, the fractured attention required to maintain a Twitter presence actively degrades their ability to perform their vital activity. Therefore, like the hay baler, the tool is discarded.
So how do we practically break the addiction to these tools if we are terrified of letting go? The author Ryan Nicodemus had an extreme but brilliant strategy for minimalism.
When he wanted to simplify his physical life, he threw a packing party. He literally boxed up every single possession in his apartment as if he were moving. Then, over the next week, he only unpacked the specific items he actually needed to use.
A toothbrush, his work clothes, a frying pan. After a week, he realized 80% of his stuff was still in boxes. Totally unnecessary. We need to apply the packing party to our digital lives.
It is the ultimate test of a tool's actual value.
Yes. Quit all your social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok cold turkey for exactly 30 days. And here is the absolutely critical kicker. Do not announce it. Do not post a dramatic multi-paragraph, "I'm taking a break from my mental health" message. Just silently vanish.
Delete the apps from your phone. After 30 days of silence, ask yourself 2 brutally honest questions. First, was my life actually notably worse without these platforms? And second, did anyone actually care or notice that I was gone?
For the vast majority of us, the reality is a slightly bruised ego when we realize the world kept spinning perfectly fine without our hot takes and our lunch photos.
Once you have aggressively curated your digital tools, you must take the final step. You must drain the shallows of your actual schedule. The software company 37 Signals ran a fascinating real-world experiment on this.
They decided to shorten their entire company's work week from 5 days to 4 days, and the astonishing result was that their employees got the exact same amount of important needle-moving work done in 4 days as they previously did in 5.
Now wait, how is that mathematically possible? Did they just force everyone to work grueling 10-hour days to make up the difference?
Not at all. They worked standard 8-hour days. What got squeezed out by the time constraint was the shallow work.
When time is artificially made scarce, human beings naturally respect it more. They stop holding pointless hour-long status meetings. They stopped endlessly surfing the web at their desks. They abandoned the toxic office politics.
37 Signals even took it a step further. They gave their employees the entire month of June completely free from any shallow, regular obligations. No customer support, no mandatory meetings. Just a full month to work deeply on their own innovative projects.
And that month of depth resulted in major, highly profitable new features for the company. The lesson is undeniable. Shallow work is highly dispensable. It extends to fill the time you give it. If you squeeze it, it vanishes without hurting the bottom line.
Which brings us back to the time outside of work, reclaiming our leisure. Because if you are doing deep work right, you are going to be exhausted by 5 p.m. Over a century ago, the British writer Arnold Bennett observed something profound.
He said, "We generally view the 16 hours outside of our workday as nothing more than a prologue and an epilogue to our jobs. We just collapse on the couch to recover so we can go back to work the next day."
He argued forcefully that those 16 hours are actually a day within a day. We should plan our leisure with the exact same rigor and respect that we plan our professional work.
This is crucial because your mental faculties do not tire in the same way your physical muscles do. If you run a marathon, your legs need literal immobility to recover. But if you spend 8 hours doing deep cognitive work, your brain doesn't necessarily need mindless immobility. It simply needs a change of activity.
If you just default to algorithmic infotainment, mindlessly scrolling TikTok, or watching a mediocre Netflix show because you feel tired, you are actually keeping your brain in a low-level state of fractured stimulation. It isn't restful.
Engaging in structured, active hobbies, reading great literature, building wooden furniture, playing a musical instrument, or having a deep conversation will actually leave you feeling vastly more refreshed than hours of semi-conscious screens in.
Which is why the final, overarching tactical strategy of the book is to schedule every single minute of your day. Use time blocks. Divide your waking hours into defined chunks and give every single minute a specific job.
Now, people hear this and recoil. They think, I don't want to be a rigid, stressed-out robot. What about spontaneity?
But scheduling your day isn't about rigidity. If brilliant inspiration strikes at 2 p.m. or a friend calls with an emergency, you absolutely erase the block and change the schedule. You are the master of the schedule.
But you use time blocking to force yourself to constantly make a mindful, deliberate choice about where your most precious, non-renewable resource, your time, is going. Without a schedule, your day will inevitably, gravitationally devolve into a shallow blur of reactionary emails and web surfing.
So, to synthesize this entire expansive journey we've been on, the fundamental architecture of the global economy is shifting aggressively to reward depth. The people who can focus will capture the value.
But at the exact same historical moment, our corporate workplace cultures and our highly engineered, addictive technologies are conspiring to make that depth impossibly rare. This divergence is your massive, asymmetric opportunity.
But capturing it requires completely, ruthlessly rewiring your brain. You have to endure the physical discomfort of boredom to strengthen your neural focus circuits. You have to establish rigorous, almost eccentric rituals to protect your concentration.
You have to treat your time and your attention as fiercely guarded, sacred resources. You have to adopt the mindset of a craftsman, ruthlessly curating your tools and draining the shallow, performative work from your schedule.
Living a deep life is a deliberate, inherently difficult choice. It pushes violently against the grain of everything our current distraction-obsessed culture celebrates. You will look weird to your peers. But you can choose to step out of the shallow end today. Tomorrow morning, you don't have to build a stone tower in Switzerland. But you can choose to schedule just one single hour of unbroken, teeth-gritting, phone-in-another-room depth. and just see what happens to your mind.
I want to leave the listener with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. We have established that the biological ability to concentrate is a highly trainable physical skill, exactly like playing the violin or blacksmithing a crucible steel sword.
If that is true, what happens to the intellectual output, the art, and the scientific breakthroughs of an entire generation that has collectively stopped practicing that skill?
By simply choosing to endure the boredom and practice your focus, you aren't just improving your own salary or your own life. You are actively preserving the very concept of human ingenuity in a world that is desperately trying to automate it away.
We started by talking about that pinball machine. How easy it is to just let the bumpers bounce you around all day, confusing motion with progress. But when it comes to the trajectory of your life and the quality of your attention, the picture is actually incredibly stark. You are either actively laying the bricks of your own stone tower, or you are quietly drowning in the noise of the shallows. The choice is yours.